Hi guys, and welcome to my video on the ImmersionRC Vortex. Now, the loyal subscribers of mine will have already been teased somewhat by me on this one. Probably a couple of months ago now, in fact, I showed that not only did I have a pre-production model of the Vortex, but also I did a overview feature, a fairly long video where I looked at it, I opened it up, talked about it a lot. It was only up for about 6 hours during one day, and unfortunately, because there are a number of features that ImmersionRC either haven't released to the public at the time, or they were tweaking and changing, and OSD firmware updates, they came to me and basically said, you know, would you mind taking that off please for the moment. Obviously, being that they very kindly gave me a pre-production model, it was a bit foolish of me to put it up without actually asking permission in the first place, so I gratefully and happily removed it. Unfortunately, a lot of people did manage to see it. I think there was about 650 views within about a day, so those people got to see a little bit of what was going on, but to be fair, there's been so many developments in the meantime that it's only fair that I now do a kind of another overview of the Vortex just as they are literally coming out into production. This is not a production model, this is the pre-production model still. You know, they're literally just shipping at the moment. There have been some changes, there have been a few tweaks. There's a whole article on the ImmersionRC website about some of the changes that have happened between pre-production and post-production models, and also by the looks of it there are some differences in some of the motors that are shipping with it, because basically these things are proven to be massively popular before they've even actually been kind of selling for a while. So anyway, let's talk about the Vortex itself. For those of you who don't know, this is the ImmersionRC Vortex. It is a 250 style racing FPV quad. It's actually 285mm from motor to motor, that's the frame. Foldable, and it's under an ARTF, so it's an almost ready to fly model. It will come out of the box with the motors installed, the ESCs installed, all the electronics installed. You will also get your Fat Shark transmitter in it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. You'll get the you will actually get the antenna, the camera that comes on it as well, not the Mobius. The only thing that basically you don't get is a Mobius or a GoPro camera with it, and you won't have a receiver with it. So you will need ideally a PPM receiver. Perfect example is the one that I'm using, which is Easy UHF 4-channel lightweight receiver. This is in a custom mount that I've made just to keep it protected from my dodgy flying, but basically that mounts to the back of it, and it only uses one cable for PPM, and that communicates with the flight control board. You can use S-Bus, but you're going to need a converter, an S-Bus converter for that, so it's an extra cable, extra weight. So if you can get yourself a PPM transmitter, it is definitely worthwhile. If you're a Futaba person like mine, I would say well worth at some point buying an Easy UHF long range system, because frankly there's so much good kit from these guys at the moment, and it's a solid base. You get good reception. You're never going to look back, even though it is a little bit expensive. The other thing to consider is also, I believe the new Nano version of these receivers is going to be compatible to be able to go inside the frame, so you can kind of hide it inside the frame, and you'll be able to run an SMA connector out and be able to connect it up. But again, that's not confirmed anyway, but that's certainly a rumour that I heard. Anyway, so the whole point of this is basically to get people into FPV racing or FPV quads with a package that's basically just there. It literally comes out of the box, and within about 5 minutes you should be able to slap a battery in it and set it up. You will need, obviously you will need something to be able to look out of the camera, so you're going to need FPV kit, so that means either a set of goggles, a monitor. You're going to need a receiver. The beauty of this particular model is that it comes with pre-built into it under the shell, so you can see the silver bit just kind of under here. That is an ImmersionRC 350mm video transmitter. It's soldered onto the PDB board, which is built as part of all of this. So the base of this is one long PDB board with all of these lovely bits of electronics in there, and it's a 40-channel transmitter. Now that means that unlike many of the previous versions of like the 600mW VTX, this will actually transmit across a number of different bands. This will actually transmit onto bands like DJI, Boscam, TBS, which means that you don't have to be pinned down to ImmersionRC or Fat Shark equipment to be able to actually use this. You will actually be able to use your own receiver. So if you've got a receiver that's currently on a Boscam frequency, you will actually be able to do a couple of button presses with this, and you'll be able to see the output of the camera immediately on there. So Immersion have thought about, you know, the fact that they can't keep pinning people down to having their equipment fully, and they've really catered for that. The other advantage of this video transmitter is if you are getting involved in FPV racing, which is becoming more and more popular, when you're at the field you're going to have, you know, 8+ people potentially racing. You need to make sure that you're not using the same bands as them, otherwise you're going to see the output of their camera whilst you're flying your quad. Bad things are going to happen, and as part of that, which you'll see in the OSD when I get into it later, ImmersionRC have built into that a way of basically having kind of a race band, which means you've got a nice broad spectrum which allows people to have 1 to 8. When you go to a race, you'll be able to say, right, I'm on 1, you're on 2, you're on 3, and regardless of what transmitter you're using, receiver you're using, you will be able to race with it. So a nice little feature there. So what we'll do first, we'll have a look at the actual frame itself. So as you can see, it's a clip out frame, front being here, back being here. The idea it all folds backwards is because if you hit a tree or something like that, then the impact is going to, of course, knock everything backwards like that, and you're not going to damage all of the plastic around here. So a nice idea there, nice and neat and compact design. The weight is very reasonable for what it is because it's all integrated into it. It can use 3S or 4S battery. You need to use a fairly high C rated battery. I've got a 4S attached to it now, but I have to admit I haven't flown on it yet. That's because it scares the bejesus out of me and my piloting skills are not particularly fantastic. Now on that point, I would say if you want to see these things in action, don't wait to see one of my videos, because frankly it's going to be like watching a granny driving a Honda Accord down the road compared to what some of the guys can do. Head onto YouTube, look up Oh My God, he's one who's been doing a lot of testing with this and has a few profiles. B-Web, he's been doing some of them as well, and I'll talk about some of the other guys that have got their own profiles on this. They can fly these things like nothing else, and like I say, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an amazing pilot just because I own one of these. I'm just telling you that these are capable of a hell of a lot, and you deserve to see what they can do and how good you can get with the practice, and I need a bit more practice for that, so yeah, just bear that in mind. Anyway, sticking on the electronics theme, the real key to this, the frame itself, and this is something that I really wanted to touch on as well because I believe it's worth crediting. If you go onto FPV Labs, and there's a link underneath my video for it, and go to the forum, basically what this was is Z-Fly Boy, who was on FPV Labs, an RC hobbyist, came up with a really nice looking design, did a load of 3D print work, basically created the frame design for this, and then what happened is that ImmersionRC saw it. I believe he was in contact with Anthony at ImmersionRC, and Anthony saw a potential for kind of providing a really nice frame design like that, tweaking it and putting a bunch of ImmersionRC electronics into it to make it what it is today. And what's really nice about that is, I think, you know, if you can take the time to go over the various hundreds of pages of threads and read through it, it's really nice to see how, you know, a hobbyist can create something and then a bigger company like Immersion can see the potential, they can join forces and they can come up with this. And you know, the thing that really makes this amazing is the fact that it's got all the electronics in it, and I don't want to take any credit away from ImmersionRC for it, but I think Z-Fly Boy also, you know, he deserves credit for what he sort of kicked off by designing to begin with, and then the whole idea of it, and you know, the conglomeration between it all is something as a designer myself that's really nice to see that in this hobby things like that can happen, and this is the result, and this is going to be a popular frame, I can assure you. So anyway, that's something that you should take into consideration if you really want to look this up. So the other things to look at electronic wise, as part of the kit you get a Fat Shark 600 TVL, and again it's pre-installed, it's there, it's already there. It's mounted via a little hinge, I don't know if you can see that, to this anti-vibration mount, which is all nice, so you don't get any of the jello coming through that, which is good. But what's also nice is if I just, in fact I'll fold this back so you can see a little bit better, is that this is actually on a hinge, so you can see the hinge up at the top in there, and that means that you can actually angle your flight camera up and down like that. So the idea of that is, of course, these things are going to be flying along at an angle, scraping on the floor like that, but if you've if you're doing that, then your camera is going to be facing the ground. You won't necessarily be able to judge what you're doing. So this gives you the ability of flying straight, knowing that actually when the camera is straight, your aircraft is actually in forward momentum, which is perfect for FPV racing. The other thing to note is that this mount is actually one of my own 3D print designs. There will be an optional kit that comes available from ImmersionRC, which will allow you to mount a Mobius or a GoPro camera onto this frame, and it will allow you to angle it back and forth. So, you know, if you're a granny flyer like me, I tend to actually fly with the flight camera pointing straight forward, so I can land the thing without it pointing up in the air, but then I have my Mobius facing this angle, which means that the video footage I review makes it look a lot more kind of like I'm not pointing at the ground, basically. And that's what the optional extra kit will allow you to do. So yeah, so that's going to be available for GoPro and Mobius cameras. Electronics wise, in regards to those two cameras, there is a port on the PDB board which allows you to actually power the cameras. You can power both Mobius and GoPro cameras from it. It's a 3 amp switching BAC basically, which means that you can power both of them, and that means you can actually remove the battery from something like a GoPro, which is going to save you, you know, a good sort of 30-40 grams, and when you're doing racing and things like that, that could be something that you really want to consider. So a nice little touch there. Other electronics that are included on the board, other than that, we've got the flight controller, of course, which is based on CleanFlight, which is a version of BaseFlight, freely available to download via the Chrome App Store. I highly recommend you have a look at it. Firmware will be updatable via the USB port, which is on the back, just there, and I'll talk a bit more about the back in a minute. And basically what I would say before you go out there and think, oh, I've got a new Vortex, I'm going to update CleanFlight to the most recent version, as they say in the manual, which you should read, is don't update it until ImmersionRC have confirmed that it's compatible. The reason for that is the OSD that we'll look at in a minute is directly linked into the flight controller. That is to say, you can change the PIDs, you can change the flight profile, you can change things in CleanFlight via the OSD. Because of that link up, when CleanFlight do a new update, ImmersionRC basically have to make sure that their OSD is still talking to it. Otherwise, bad things could happen. So just bear that in mind. And as part of this project, ImmersionRC have said that they will, of course, keep providing updates for the Vortex based on new versions of CleanFlight coming out. So that's something that is very important to bear in mind. Otherwise, you could find yourself in some trouble. Other electronics in this that are very much worth mentioning. The motors, which come pre-fitted, they are going to be T-Motor 1806. Now, I say they're going to be, there's a little bit of information on the ImmersionRC website at the moment in regards to the type of motors that are going to come with it. I believe they're getting some sort of ImmersionRC branded motors, and some of the kits going out now have got T-Motor, some of them have got the ImmersionRC. The prop spinners on the top of them, there are some slight changes to this. For example, the versions that I've got are just the standard T-Motor ones. There's no nylock nut in there. These are not counter-rotated threads or anything like that. So in the event of a crash, these could potentially, you know, if they're still spinning, these could come loose, disappear into the long grass, and there are some changes being done as part of that. So well worthwhile keeping up to speed with that. You know, depending on when you watch this video, that may well have changed. And also the popularity of these mean that availability for these motors may be differing from batch to batch, etc, etc. Anyway, I'll leave you to discuss with Immersion about that. But anyway, the actual size of these motors designed is 1806 with 2300 kV. So these are capable of 3S and 4S, like I say. It came as a bit of a surprise to some that they weren't the bigger motors, and frankly, when you see these things flying, you'll see you don't really need it. They're designed to be flown on a 5 to 6 inch prop maximum, no 7 inch. Without getting sort of very close and very dicey to the frame, so no point in doing that. And various profiles that are set up in the electronics, you know, dictate what size of prop you're using with what type of battery. So inside the arms hold the magical ESCs. Now these are 12 amp ESCs. They are custom made ImmersionRC ones with one-shot 125 compatibility. If you don't know what that means, Google it. Basically, it means they can cope with the faster rotating motors, different frequencies, blah 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 blah. I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. I could probably give you a more detailed information upon that, but being completely honest, even I need to look a bit more on what that all means. So anyway, take my word for it. They're one shot 125 compatible, as is Clean Flight, hence why they're a good match. The most important thing with them is that they have this thing called rotor sense, and rotor sense is something that ImmersionRC has come up, which I think personally could well revolutionise the way that quad frames are built, especially in terms of the ESC. Anyone who's built a quad will know that you have three, on a brushless motor, you have three outputs. What you do is, if you want it to rotate clockwise, what you do is you plug it all in, you give it a spin, and hopefully it goes the right way. If it doesn't, you pull two of the pins out and you swap them over, and then it spins the correct way. All fine if you're building a nice big 450 size quad and you've got bullets and everything like that. If you're building something as small as this, or an FPV racer, you really want to solder things in, you want to make it as neat and tidy as possible, then that's a pain in the backside, because you've got to pre-test it, then you've got to solder it. If you get it wrong, you've got to desolder it. What rotor sense does, very basically, is that when you power the thing on, all you do is you say, Mr. Motor, I'm going to spin you the way I want you to spin, and you spin it like that, and the ESC feels the pulse and it says, okay, that's going to be spinning that way then. You then give it another flick in the same direction to reconfirm it, and the ESC says, oh right, okay, yeah, you've actually confirmed that you want to go that way. It gives you 5 beeps once it's confirmed, and it's told which way it's going to go, so you can solder it up as it is already pre-soldered on these, and it just works basically. And these are going to be available, I believe ImmersionRC are going to be marketing these to be available as separate standalone ESCs at some point with rotor sense, so that's really going to be a nice feature in the future for even bigger quads. Hopefully they'll come up with some bigger versions of it, but that is all pre-built as part of the kit on the Vortex. So other than that, electronically, the only other thing that's worth mentioning is on the back here we have an LED, and I will be demonstrating this LED in all its glory. We've got a multi, this is all controlled by a 32-bit processor, as is pretty much everything on this. There's 7 STM32 processors on the Vortex alone. There's one in each of the ESC, there's one in the LED, one in the flight controller, one in the OSD, and you know, that's why it is a technologically fantastic in this kind of size package. But the point is that as part of the OSD, you can configure this in a multiple number of ways. You can change obviously the output colours. It's an RGB style colour, so there's loads of output colours, but you've also got twin colour, so you can actually have a foreground and a background colour. You can make it blink, you can do a gradient, and what I'll show you and demonstrate to you later on in this video is something where you can basically program it to be like a traffic light system. So when you've got full throttle on, you're in green, and then you suddenly come off the throttle, you go down through amber into red for braking, basically telling anyone who's in front of you, looking at you in an FPV race, that you're slowing down, which is a nice feature. And the other thing that's noticeable on here is this little button here. That is well, it's a multiple use button, but what the idea is going to be is that if you, let's say you've got a DJI receiver, you get this out of the box, you plug it in, you can't see squat through your camera. Reason being is that this is pre-programmed to ImmersionRC, so what you need to do, rather than fiddling around with these little up down dip dip switches, what you do is you hold this button down for 2 seconds, it will flip to another channel, another 2 seconds, and eventually you'll find a channel that is outputting on your receiver, and then you're all set up and ready to go, and then you can configure everything through the OSD. So a nice simple one push operation on that. Likewise on the board itself, there's a little button which allows you to do the firmware updates via USB, and it's all basically through that. This is a pre-production one, as I've said many a time before, so a slight difference there, so I won't be able to show you the firmware upgrade on that, because I have to use a special tool to do it on this particular model, but for all consumers you're going to be able to do that via USB. So all in all, I think that is pretty much the overview that you need to know. Price wise, it's $449 RRP. I've seen them in the UK for about 335 quid pre-order at the moment by people like FPV UK and Build Your Own Drones. So it's not a cheap option, but then again, when you consider actually if you buy a frame that's half decent, then you buy Open Pilot, then you buy or Naze 32, the motors, the ESCs, it's actually a pretty competitive price. Add that, you know, a 70 quid for a video transmitter. When you actually put all of this together, you find yourself in a position where actually this does make good sense. And obviously there's going to be spare parts, everything like that, and you know, the package that you get is literally plug it in, 5 minutes down the road, you're set up and you're ready to go. So with all that said, let's get a little bit more involved on it now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the menus, the OSD, and we'll walk you through the step-by-step of how you set it up basically. So once you've turned it on, you've got it all bound up with your transmitter. You then get to see the transmitter setup wizard. This is obviously once you've got your OSD set up. So I'll run through that quickly to see what you need to do. So all we've got to do is center controls, and then we're just going to move to the left and hold. Turn to neutral. Your left and hold. Turn to neutral. Throttle to min, back to neutral, pitch stick back, turn to neutral, left stick back and left, back to neutral, level the quad, right stick back and hold, and we are done. And you can see once you've done that, you go into the ImmersionRC Easy OSD. Now what I'll do, I'm going to just turn it off quickly, and we'll fire it back up again. And you'll see basically when you actually load it up, once you've done the actual transmitter setup, this is what you're going to be faced with. This is your kind of your overview to tell you what your pack is, what your voltage currently is, what channel you're on, everything like that. So that's all set up to begin with. So what we'll do now is we'll explore some of the menu, we'll look at the LED, and we'll go into a bit of detail on that. Okay, so to access the menu, very simple. It's just bottom left with your left hand stick. And you can see we have the various options. Now to navigate around here, all we've got to do is up and down on the right hand stick, and if we want to enter one of the menus, we flick into the right, flick to the left. So what I'll do is I'll go into each of these, I'll show you some of the settings, and then also using this nice reflection that I've got of the LED down here, we'll take a look at the LED and some of the fun features that you can do as part of that. So OSD setup, let's go into that. So basically you've got landscape. Now landscape means the type of OSD that you're going to be using. Options are easy OSD, air race, HUD, gamer, and back to easy OSD. So easy OSD is what we were looking at before. So this is basically your standard easy OSD setup. Bottom left hand corner you've got your voltage and your milliamps per hour, or sorry, per minute being used. In the center in the middle you've got your current draw currently. You've got on the right hand side the milliamps per hour being used at the moment, so that will count upwards. You've got flight time in minutes, which obviously is 0 at the moment. You've got your attitude in the top right hand corner, and as part of that, channel 5, as you can see here, I have a 3-pin switch on my Futaba set to channel 5, and that means that if I flip it middle, I get these various options. So at the moment it's set to default when it's back in horizon mode. If I go to the middle, it's in angle mode, and if I go to the bottom, it's in acro mode. And I'll talk about those in a moment. You can also see meters away from you, and you can see the RSSI setup as well. So obviously I've got RSSI 0 because I'm literally sat next to it. It's also telling us our pseudo name, which I'll talk about later, which is IRC OSD, and it's also telling us the frequency that we're transmitting on. So that's the basic easy OSD. Back into the menu, take a look at some of the others. So we've got, for example, if we go into HUD mode, come back out, and you can see we've got HUD mode. So if I move it around on this rather bland and boring piece of cardboard that I've got in front, we've got a kind of an F-18 style HUD in front of us, which is nice and simple, and it gives us altitude, and it also gives us speed, I believe, as part of that. Come back out again, back in. Then we've got gamer mode. Our gamer mode is something that's kind of in beta at the moment. The idea of gamer mode, and this stems across a lot of the features in the OSD, the idea of gamer mode is to try and come up with a kind of a level playing field. There's been a lot of testing going on, as far as I've read up on, you know, by the guys in Immersion. Out in Belgium and places like that, and what people are trying to do is come up with kind of a set of rules and point system that allows racing to be done, you know, fairly, and to kind of give bonus to people who are flying fast and low compared to people who are flying really high up and then sort of dropping down, never see other quads and stuff like that. So it's a very difficult one because it's a three-dimensional world, but you know, people are trying to sort of practice it. Now, gamer mode, if we just come out here, you'll see as soon as you come out of that is it's kind of waiting to be armed. You're in gamer mode and it's telling you you've got a 3-lap race, you've got 30 seconds per lap. All of these things are configurable within the OSD menu system, and the idea is that you kind of you find yourself a course, you map it out to work out how long it should take per lap. Then in the OSD you set it up, and then you tell other people that this is, you know, this is how to set it up, the parameters for it. And then what it can do in gamer mode, it can actually use things like altitude via the altimeter that's actually built into the Vortex to know how high you were. You sort of set a ceiling and things like that, and then it will use a point system dependent on how fast you do each lap and things like that. So rather complicated, well worthwhile reading up on it if it interests you, and I'm sure it does quite a lot of people, especially if you've got areas that where you want to set up an FPV racing setup. But anyway, that's just a brief overview of some of the OSD screens. I'm not going to go into each one of them, and again, if I want to change back, the one that I tend to use more than anything is good old OSD, so I'll put it back into that. Okay, margins, very simply, this is just how the OSD displays on your screen. So if you've got a full HD screen, for example, where you've got kind of letterboxing, you put it into HD mode. If I come out, you'll see now that all the wording and everything is crushed down on the screen, so it's not actually right at the extent of the screen itself. It's squashed down as if there were letterboxes there, basically. So it's just how the words display on the screen based on the screen type that you've got. So I shall set that back to normal. Pseudo-name, that is basically your username. So, you know, for example, if I was going flying, and what I'll probably do in a minute is change it to D3WEY, the idea being with that is that if people are spectating via FPV goggles or other receivers, they can tune into your band, and they of course can see who they're looking at, and quite a useful little feature there. There's probably some other uses that could be quite useful as well. Moving down, pack capacity speaks for itself. You put the pack capacity in that you've got for your battery. It detects the cell count anyway, so it knows whether it's a 3S or a 4S. And it can take into account then how much usage you've got on that battery, flight time, everything like that. Beeper frequency, the Vortex, as per Clean Flight, has got an output beeper where if you're flying, and if I give you an example, if I come back out, let's say I throttle up, and let's say I now throttle down as if I've crashed. That is the onboard beeper basically telling me, you know, come find me, and it will beep away until you go back into the menu system, basically. Now that's a very high-pitched beep, reason being that under the OSD menu for beeper frequency, I've got it set to 3000. Let's say I took this down to an extreme level of, I don't know, sort of 600, something like that. There you go, 600, come back out of it, do the same thing, throttle up a little bit, throttle down, and you can hear the beepers much lower frequency. Volume itself isn't necessarily much difference, but obviously you tune it to your own ears so you know what you're listening for. It's not very noisy. I have to admit, I'd like it to be noisier. It may be that the production models are a little bit noisier than this. Suffice to say, I've spent some time in a field with my Vortex trying to find it, and I actually ended up not using the beeper until I got within probably about 3 meters of it. I ended up having to use the RSSI to track down my model, which was not a pleasant feeling, being that it was a pre-production one. Anyway, that's how you would set that. Alarm setup, a simple on-off, so that's to say you will get an alarm warning on your OSD for battery, voltage, milliamp hours used, RSSI if it goes over a certain amount, and also flight time if it exceeds a certain flight time. So that's nice and simple. I'm going to skip over LED setup and do that separately in a moment. Video transmitter. Now this is where this 40-channel transmitter comes into play here. And what it is a really nice graphical description of where various bands lie over the top of each other. So if you look at the little pyramid system as it is, the top row of that is showing you the pyramids for all 8 channels of the ImmersionRC or Fat Shark. If you look below it, you can see that the race band is a much kind of broader scale. So that is to say that if you look at the ImmersionRC band and then look all the way down to BOSCAM, you can see that channel 1 and channel 2 are getting very close to each other. So and for example, BOSCAM B is quite close, as well as BOSCAM A. So what you want is something that's got a nice gapping between the lot of them, which is why race band comes into play. So if you're with 8 people doing an 8-person flight and everyone's using race band, you would be able to select race band on your Vortex, and then you would say, right, I'm going to use channel 1, my friend's going to use channel 2, you know, racer number 3 is going to use 3, and by doing that you get nice separation between all of them, regardless of what frequency they're actually flying on. So it's a really nice way of kind of keeping the ability of using your Vortex across various different bands, and also meaning that you can fly with lots of people without having interference, which is obviously quite important if you're flying through forests at 70 odd miles an hour. So yeah, all you do is you choose your frequency, you can choose your band, and you can choose your channel number all in this. So I'll come back out of that. Game setup, as I've just been discussing, is very much kind of beta at the moment, but you can set your lap numbers, you can set your time per lap, so that's where you would fly it first, and you can set kind of the altitude, so the ceiling, before you get penalised for points and stuff like that. Flight control, in here you have a choice of 3 profiles, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment as well. You can set up your PIDs for that particular profile. You can set up your receiver rates, so if you wanted to do some expo, it's always better to do it in the flight controller if you want a higher resolution than doing it actually on your transmitter, for example. So if you wanted a bit more expo, you could dial it in here. All done at the field, you don't have to plug it in via USB, anything like that. And again, this is kind of a direct link into clean flight by doing it through this. So if you change your PIDs, it's the same as plugging it into USB, changing your settings, unplugging it, rebooting it, plugging it back in. It's the same as doing that, but you do it directly, and as soon as you change them, it will reboot and it will reset your PIDs to the settings that you want. Likewise, you can do loop time and PID controller, 2 things that I'm not even going to fuss about. And if you want to, let's say I've got it on a level playing field now, calibrate my accelerometer, 1 click, couple of beeps, and that's my accelerometer recalibrated. So if I just had a shunt, that's quite a useful setting. Now, bearing in mind we've got 3 profiles here, so I'm on profile 1. Let's come back out again, and this is where Pro Tuning comes into its own. So we're going to Pro Tuning. Now what's lovely about this is basically in Pro Tuning you can choose to be using the settings from a specific pilot. So the default setting, as we can see, is good old Anthony RC. So that is Anthony from ImmersionRC, and his particular settings, you can see the type of settings they are in the bottom left hand corner. So you can look at these various ones without changing anything, and then you can decide which one you might want to try. So you can see Anthony RC, he is using GemFam 5040s. Now I only own 5030s, so that's not ideal for me, for example. You can see that this profile has been set up based on the same motors I have on a 4S, which I'm using, and he was using a Mobius camera, which I'm using, so weight and everything like that should be fairly similar. Style is quite key. Easy Rider means that for a user, a novice pilot, the PIDs are not going to be to a point where you're going to be going nuts out at 90 miles an hour, doing flips and crazy loops and stuff like that. It's designed for steady, smooth flight. Get used to it. Get used to the compensation in the various flying modes, and go from that. However, when you get braver, rather than fiddling with PIDs yourself, you could say, well, okay, you know, I'll load Anthony into profile number 1. But I would like to be able to have a second profile that uses someone a little bit bolder. And as you can see, if I cycle through here, we've got various different profiles. So we've got Buweb here, and he's got an Easy Rider setting, a Fun Time setting, and if you take a look in the bottom left again, Open Race, these are all different settings with different PIDs, and you can load that into profile 2 or profile 3, so then when you choose profile 1, 2, 3, you're choosing between 3 different pilot settings. So we've got a lot of settings for that. We've got Boris B, very acrobatic, using a GoPro and slightly different motors. You've got No Comp. If you haven't seen any of these guys, YouTube them. Trust me, it'll find some entertainment. And we've got, oh my god, I've already set him a challenge of flying through a helicopter whilst it's in flight and under a train, which he seems interested in, but unfortunately I don't know whether we're going to be able to find a helicopter pilot. And I am joking, by the way. Unless anyone wants to do that, in which case I will gladly come along and film it. Anyway, so that is the various profiles. So all you do is you load those settings and you choose which profile to load it into. So if I wanted Anthony in, well, I've got him in 1. Let's say I wanted Overgod in 2. I'd go over to him, precision flying, 2, load settings. Gives me a beep, and basically that is to say that that is now done. So in profile 2, if I went up to flight control and chose profile 2, I'm going to be using those settings. If I choose profile 1, then I'm going to be using Anthony's settings. So nice and simple way of doing it. Demo mode is a game of asteroids, but you can't actually play them, but still something nice to look at. And if we go into about, it just tells you what version of firmware. And again, I stress to you, clean flight, don't go updating your firmware without checking with ImmersionRC first, otherwise bad things can happen, because as you've just witnessed, it's all tagged in between the OSD and clean flight itself. So the only other thing to look at is the LED setup, and we will do that right now. So if I go into LED, now what we've got fixed mode with various parameter settings. We've got blink mode, and you should be able to see just here in this screen here that it's blinking away, and I'll go into each one in a bit more detail. And we've got off. So let's go into fixed mode. Now we've got gradient, none, intensity. So in intensity, let's say, in fact let's start with none. So in fixed mode with none, all it is a colour. So we've got green, full brightness, blue, yellow, cyan, magenta, orange, none, bright white, red, and we're back to green again. Very nice. However, what we can also do is we can go to intensity. Now what that means is you've just seen it just dulled it slightly. Now if you watch what happens when I put my throttle up, higher the throttle, higher the intensity of the colour. Nice little feature. And again, you can change the foreground colour to whatever you want, so you can have it as different colours. However, what you can also do is if we go to gradient, we can now mix colours. So you can see here at the moment I have my throttle all the way down and I have a nice intense red. So if I put my throttle up, it goes yellow, and the further I put it up, it goes green. So with a simple green-red like that, I now have traffic light braking. So if you're flying behind me in a race and I've got it at full green, you know I'm going full bore, full throttle. You know if I suddenly back off and it goes red that I'm putting the brakes on somewhat, so be aware that my altitude and my attitude is going to drop slightly, and obviously yellow means that I'm kind of halfway between the two. So again, it's just a really nice little feature that you can play around with, and again you can change what intensity and what colours they go through and the gradients and everything like that. It's a full kind of RGB setup, so you don't have to have traffic light, you can have whatever you want for that. And if we go up to blinking, you can see at the moment blinking green-red, and I've got it in parameter none, so it's just blinking full green-red. And again, I can do intensity, so everything gets brighter, but likewise I can do frequency, which means if I have full throttle, I'm flashing like a banshee. If I come off, I'm flashing nice and slow. So there are various different settings which, again, if you're doing a race with a lot of people, if you kind of coordinate so you know who each person is and what settings they've got, you can have a whale of a time because you know who you're flying behind, because you can tell from the actual colour of their LED and the way it's acting, and you can see whether they're braking and stuff like that. So a fantastic little feature of that, and something that you just really don't see on other racing quadcopters. It's pre-built, and again you can just set it up whilst you're in the field. So that is a basic overview of the ImmersionRC Vortex and the OSD and the LED setup. Plenty to play with. The other thing that you can do, of course, you can go in via USB. You can change stuff in clean flight. One thing that I haven't mentioned, the top right hand corner angle, horizontal, horizon angle, and acro mode. Now what that is Angle mode means that you have self-stabilized. The quadcopter will fly itself and it will not fall out of the sky. If you rock yourself to the left, then you will find that when you release your sticks, it will come back and it will stay level. It's going to get pushed around by the wind because there's no GPS at the moment on it, but what it will do is it will stay level. Horizontal, and also in angle mode, it's worthwhile saying that there's a limit to which it will go. So it will say, okay, 40 degrees is the maximum I'm ever going to go. So if I push all the way like that, it will only go to 40 degrees. It won't let me flip the quadcopter over. If you go into horizon mode, what that will let you do is it will let you flip the quadcopter over. So you can actually do it. However, when you come out of it, it will try and self-level. So the idea is that you can do some flips and some rolls in horizon mode, but ultimately when you take your finger off that stick, it's going to say, okay, get myself back to a level playing field. Obviously if you're upside down at the time, it's going to struggle to do that, so just bear that in mind. And of course acro mode, which if we go all the way to the bottom, acro mode is complete manual. You stabilise the quadcopter, not the onboard accelerometers or anything like that. You are responsible for making sure that that thing doesn't fall out of the sky. It means you can go ridiculously fast, and if you get good at it, you can do all the stuff that these guys do, but it will fall out of the sky unless you know what you're doing, so be very wary of that. Personally, what I do with this is I prefer to have it in angle mode, and at the back of the switch, horizon in the middle, and then acro at the bottom. So I'll probably reverse those out once I get a chance. But that's the basics of it. You can do some other things with clean flight, but at the moment, frankly, with this setup, you really don't need to. So anyway, that is an overview of it. I'm sorry it's been a long time coming. Like I say, there's going to be some changes. Please look at the ImmersionRC website. Take a look at some of the information they're putting out there. This looks to be a really popular quadcopter even before it's out there. It's going to be very interesting to see how people get along with these. We know the professionals, as I will call them, you know, the guys who do this really well and really fast. We know they're loving this thing and they're managing it very well. What will be very interesting to see is the differential between the novices and the people who want it for other things, because you can put a GoPro on this and fly it nice and slow, do some aerial photography, you know, chase a plane around and stuff like that. You can do that absolutely fine. But likewise, it'll be interesting to see that development between people who use this as a kind of a step into the hobby for FPV flying, and then develop it onto FPV racing and stuff like that, and also the developments around FPV racing. So anyway, that's a lot of talk for everything, but hopefully that's given you a nice overview of the Vortex. Fingers crossed they'll be out with people fairly soon, so we'll be able to get some feedback of it. And I, for one, will be very much intrigued to know what other people think. And I'm going to continue the practicing with it, and we'll see how it goes.